Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, what can be done about the declining fish stocks around the world? Are we running out of fish? Then there's movie star and activist Jeffrey Wright, and I'll be talking to former Chilean President Michelle Bachelet about her new role as head of the UN's Agency for Women, liberating women. But first, international justice. This week, the International Criminal Court asked for warrants for the arrest of Colonel Gaddafi, his son Saif, and his intelligence head for what they described as widespread and systematic attacks on civilians. Deaths were the result of their activities. But does such a move do anything to help Libyan civilians in practice? I mean, or might it in fact, these sort of legal proceedings, prove a hindrance? I'm joined here in the studio by lawyer Philippe Sands. Welcome, Philippe. And from New York by author and activist David Reef. David, welcome.
Thank you.
Do you think, David, that this action we're considering by the ICC is something that will improve the situation in Libya or not?
Well, in the short run, not at all. You can make an argument for the ICC in terms of deterrence, but the fact of the matter is it seems to be that the NATO intervention is now an intervention seeking to bring about regime change, and the indictment of Colonel Gaddafi and his intimates is going to be very secondary to those activities. The original mission, which was protecting civilians in Benghazi and Misrata and elsewhere, has obviously now given way to full-scale regime change. The statement of General Sir David Richards on this subject is pretty clear, even though he doesn't use the word. I'm rather skeptical of the ICC. I don't think Mr. Moreno Ocampo, the prosecutor, has done a good job. But more importantly, I think sometimes it's useful and sometimes it's not. And the idea that one can say that an ICC indictment is always useful seems to me a big mistake.
And let me turn at that point to you, Philippe. What do you think the influence of Mr. Ocampo's intervention is? Is it? David's not sure it's helpful, but
I think David may or may not be right. Time will tell. It's always hazardous to predict. But one thing that is significant is that it's not Mr. Moreno Ocampo's initiative. He was presented with a fait accompli by the Security Council, and what is striking about this situation is it's the first time ever that all 15 members of the Security Council, including China, Russia, the US, have voted a referral of the Libyan situation to the International Criminal Court. So Mr. Moreno Ocampo wakes up one morning and in his lap is the order from the Security Council to investigate. He's then criticised for investigating, which I think is a bit unfair, but he goes off and investigates, and the interesting issue is how he chooses the three who are on the first list. I gather there will be more coming in the autumn. But one thing that is important is that it may well be that Mr. Moreno Ocampo's office is receiving information internally from the Gaddafi regime, from people who are looking to get out, and it may contribute to a split within those around Colonel Gaddafi and an earlier rather than later dissolution of that power base. We just don't know. Equally, on the other side, it could be said that the existence of an arrest warrant now about to be issued perhaps internationally would make it impossible for him to step down. But against that, people say he's not the kind of person who would have ever stepped down anyway. So I think the simple answer is we don't know. Time will tell.
What about the situation, some people say that virtually all of Mr. Ocampo's targets are African, are based in Africa and so on, and that this is, some Africans feel, in a sense of obsession with the crime taking place in Africa and so on, or maybe he would say it's the best way to try and level the odds. What do you feel about the apparent absorption with Africa?
It's going to be weak offending countries and individuals who are going to be brought to book by the ICC. The idea that a Russian general for Chechnya or arguably an American military commandant or a Chinese officer in Xinjiang or in Tibet that's a non-starter given the role of the Security Council. So for now it's going to be, if you like, villains with fewer friends who are going to be brought before it. I don't think in the long term that's so terrible. You have to start somewhere.
Well, here I do take a different view from David, and quite firmly in this sense. It does look like a lopsided court. It does look as though it is a court which focuses on individuals from countries that are not able to really go to bat, for individuals who perhaps were in favour but are no longer in favour. I've had conversations with Luis Moreno Campo, and I've said to him, why aren't you looking at American activities in Afghanistan? Amazingly, Afghanistan is a party to the statute of the International Criminal Court. He's got full authority to investigate what's going on at Bagram Air Base, where there have been massive abuses, well documented over time already, widely reported. No investigation. Why not? And the answer to that, of course, is the reason that David, in effect, is alluding to. It's politically very difficult. But I think a problem is being stored up, and targeting a handful of African and now Arab states in particular circumstances is not a sustainable way forward, and the ICC is going to have to bend over backwards to show that the justice system internationally is not lopsided, which means looking at British, Americans, French and others if the circumstances arise, and in Afghanistan, for example, they plainly do.
But you think, David, that we're dreaming here if we think that these powerful countries will put themselves in the dock of the ICC, that it's just not going to happen, and that the ICC will fade away?
I think any prosecutor who tried this would be out. They would find a way to get rid of him in short order. I do think that any investigation of I think the Chinese would put tremendous pressure on the Americans were a prosecutor to investigate the repression in Tibet. I think if the Americans thought seriously that there was going to be an investigation of, I mean, I agree completely, of course, with with Philippe about what's happened. I think a very strong case could be made that these crimes and abuses took place. I simply don't. I don't think it's likely that the Security Council would stay passive in such a situation. Interestingly, Moreno Campo, in the last sort of moments of his tenure, probably could do it because he could throw it back in their court, but it doesn't strike me he's the sort of fellow who's going to do that.
Well, the issue that he's got right now that is sitting in his in-tray is the question of Israel and Palestine and the attacks on Gaza, and that will test your idea, David, as to whether he's going to have the wherewithal in the last year of his tenure to launch an investigation to those issues. Now, as you can imagine, in that scenario, there are going to be some pretty powerful countries who are going to come down on him like a ton of bricks if he does that, and we will wait and see what, if anything, happens.
Thank you both very much indeed for joining us there. As you can hear, the situation is not that optimistic at the moment, but there are glimmers of hope, perhaps. Glimmers of hope. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now another country in need of reconciliation and justice, Pakistan. Salman Taseer, the governor of Pakistan's Punjab province, wanted changes to his country's blasphemy laws, which only protected Islam. It was a deeply controversial and dangerous wish, and in January he was murdered by one of his own bodyguards. His daughter, Sherbano Taseer, has taken up the fight against extremism that cost her father his life. And she's with me now. Welcome, very, very good. Great to have you with us. I mean, was it really the standing up for a Christian woman accused of blasphemy that was the final sort of blow that brought about his death? The casus belli, as it were?
Well, it was, I mean, what prompted the man to do what he did was related to this whole issue of blasphemy. But, you know, the aftermath of my father's murder, it really, it brought a rather frightening reality home, which is that this man is not just a man or an organization, he's a mindset. and he's an environment. And this kind of mindset and environment is being created and allowed to flourish in Pakistan, where somebody who's so deluded in this warped piety can take the law into his own hands and kill somebody for it.
Mm. And in fact, what your father wanted to do was change the law, yes?
Well, no, he spoke about the misuse of these blasphemy laws, which is a very valid point. These laws target the poor and the defenseless and the minorities in Pakistan, and they're most often used as an instrument of repression and terror. So, so my father had said that they were vague and open-ended, and that they required an amendment to prevent this from happening. And these rabid clerics, they took to the streets and they twisted my father's views to suit their own incendiary narrative.
He wanted to change the law, but he wanted to get across a more forgiving attitude throughout Pakistan, didn't he? I mean,
right. My father's message was one of humanity. It was a poor Christian illiterate woman who had been languishing in jail for over a year. And she wasn't the first. There have been almost 2,000 people that have been targeted by this law since its inception in 1986. And that was his point.
And I mean, when he came into court first time, the murderer, I mean, he was garlanded with flowers by lawyers, wasn't he?
Right.
That's what I read, anyway.
Yeah,
it seemed extraordinary.
By 200 lawyers, and these men don't realize that what this man did goes against their very profession. He took the law into his own hands and he killed somebody because he didn't agree with what they said. And it just shows you, I think, how far the tentacles of extremism have spread in Pakistan. And it makes me wonder just how independent our judiciary is.
How do you think extremism can be lessened in Pakistan? Can it be? How could it happen?
Well, that's a $1 million question.
Yeah.
But because it's a multifaceted problem.
Yeah.
It has to have a multi-pronged approach, I feel. And I mean, something that I feel very strongly about is this madrasa system in Pakistan.
Yes. Now that's for people not familiar with the word. Those are schools, religious schools. Yes?
Right. And they're attached to a mosque, and the local cleric in there has all the power. He's allowed to preach whatever he wants, and and he does. And what's happening is that these madrasas have become breeding grounds for Islamic radicalism and terrorism. So if you if you think of the future of your country, that is your next generation, right? That is the youth. And what these men are doing is that they're capitalizing on the youth of Pakistan, and they are raising an entire generation of children to believe that their only contribution to Islam and to the world is jihad, and to have this very narrow worldview. And if you go into a madrasa, they're 8 or 9 year olds who they don't know much about history or math or science or English, but they know how to fire a gun, and they know how to build a bomb, and they know how to blow themselves up. And so these clerics are teaching children not how to live, but how to die. And so it's really worrying, because it's a mindset that we're dealing with, and the state has completely abdicated its responsibilities in this regard, because they're allowing these hate mongers an open platform from which to operate, and there's no reform of the syllabus in these madrasas.
And given that, and given that teaching going on, presumably you have to be conscious of security as you go about now. I mean, you either to have protection or a bodyguard or something like that, you might offend the very same people who were offended by your father.
Yeah, and as we've seen in Pakistan, if you believe in something, you're going to have to be willing to die for it. But I mean, I think they've got what they wanted. We've obviously, my family has taken security measures.
Mm. But they've got what they wanted. You mean the enemy has got what they wanted with the death of your father? Yeah,
or so they think. But they don't know that there's an entire Pakistan who mourned for my father, and who mourned for what happened. And we refuse to let these extremists win. We're a very resilient nation. We're a very strong people. These people, they don't represent the average Pakistani. They're a small minority. They happen to be loud and well armed and well funded, but they're not the majority.
They're not the majority. They're very much a minority.
No, they're not
just
voted
looking
in.
in the papers, you know, it's so often the image, tragically, the image of Pakistan is of an event like this.
Well, and that really breaks my heart, because Pakistan has so much more to offer, and it's these bombs and killings that make it into the newspapers. But these terrorists, they lack legitimacy. These extremists, they lack legitimacy. They've never gotten more than 10% of the popular vote. It's always the secular and progressive parties that are voted into power. But what's frightening is that they have a disproportionate amount of street power, and I feel like it's only increasing. And I mean, I can't state that enough.
Yeah. And I mean, you saw in the case with your father, I mean, lawyers not willing to take part because they were frightened, really,
right,
instead of acting for the law and so on and so on.
Yeah, there's an atmosphere of fear in Pakistan. If they could get the governor of the largest, of the most populous province in Pakistan, then is anyone safe?
Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
She wants more female peacekeepers and an end to violence against women. The former Chilean president, Michelle Bachelet, you may remember she was with us when she was president of Chile a couple of years ago. Well, now she's executive director of UN Women, a newly established UN agency for gender equality and empowerment of women. It's been more than 30 years since the UN first adopted the Convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women, but some would argue that actually inequality has got worse than better, perhaps. But what can this new agency actually do to help women around the world? Earlier, I met with Michelle Bachelet, who was in London this week to meet with British officials to discuss how to turn around the lives of women across the developing world. Madame Bachelet, Michelle, there's tremendous support, verbal support and so on, for what you're doing and what can be done for empowering women and so on and so forth. Have you encountered any opposition to it, or does the opposition exist but stays under the surface?
I have to tell you, until now we have received a lot of support, and we'll continue working with all the member states, because what we need is governments to have the ownership and the commitment and the engagement with women's rights, because we can do a lot, but the more important thing is that in every country women can have more opportunities, more possibilities.
And what have been the occasions in terms of in the areas where I guess women are probably less well looked after or whatever, but what have been the situations you've seen that have really moved you, when you've seen real need and real lack of empowerment, real lack of funds?
Well, I would say different situations. Going to different countries where you see that poverty has the face of women and children. And that's something that really moves me and makes me think how we empower economically women, because we know that women are very important drivers of the economy, particularly in those countries where the labor force in agriculture is mainly women, and there's many countries like that. You see that, I've been in refugee camps, and you see that the majority of the refugees are women and children. And on the other hand, you see women who were victims of rape, who were victims as means of war in conflict or post-conflict countries, or women who are victims of female genital mutilation. But you see that in those countries they do have laws who prohibit it. But still, those kind of social norms of traditions are being performed, harming so many girls.
Everybody thinks you'll run again for president of Chile. You could only do one term, so you have to have a period out, and then you can try again. Are you tempted by that?
Well, I have said to this question every time I've been asked that my agenda now is to work for women and girls in the world.
So you haven't made a decision about the future, really yet?
Well, I'm just starting in this job, so
yes,
I'm always surprised that everybody's asking me for the future when I'm just starting a new thing. I'm very passionate about this. Yes.
Well, it's because I think the job of having been president of Chile is a very interesting job too. Do you know what I mean? It would be different if your previous post had not been so visible, but so people are very interested in what you did in Chile as well as what you're doing now.
I know,
That's
but as I tell you,
really.
now I'm very happy doing what I'm doing.
Do you have a measure for what would be interim success for you? If only I could ... introduce into this country that, or what would be a measurement for you of that you were making progress?
Economical empowerment is essential, and this will be one essential area we'll be working for. Second, and it will change the kind of interventions country to country, of course. But when we're talking of economics, we're talking workers in good labor conditions, we're talking SMEs in the rural and urban, we're talking CEOs, we're talking in the large dimensions. Second, political participation. We need to enhance women's voices, their leadership, and their political participation. Third, ending violence against women. And fourth, particularly women in the heart of the peace and security agenda. Not only protect them or responding to them when they are victims, that's a very important part, but also how we ensure more women in the peace talks, how we ensure more women in the peace-building processes, because usually women are very important, but they have to be present in all the steps, not only at the end. But I would tell you, I mean, if we are successful, I hope we'll live in a life free of violence for women, where women's voices are heard, and where women's income can be ensured, because that will mean that we'll tackle poverty, that will ensure food security, and nutrition security, and also that women can be not only seen as victims, but particularly as agents of change, as agents of development.
Doing something as well, yeah. And that would complete your having achieved the things that you...
I'm not going to get all of this in a four-year term, because this is, I mean, many areas you need to make very deep cultural changes, because it's not easy, you know. Everybody says, oh yes, women are essential, but passing from rhetoric to action, we still have a long way to go.
Last time we talked, in September 2009, you said that after you finished your term as president, you would like to, quote, work for the people, with the people, in something that would be useful. You found it in this new job, haven't you? I
have. The only thing that I always say that I will give more time for my family, and that I didn't do that. My family is still in my country, I'm working in New York. But you know what happens is that, I mean, this is a so important cause. It's the half of the humanity. People who need so much. So it's good that you remember me, that I told you that, because it's really what I've been doing my whole life, and until the end of my life, I would like to be useful for the people in terms of serving the people and their needs.
Well, I hope the achievements go from strength to strength. Great to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Good luck over the first 4 years, and if relevant, the second 4 years.
Thank you very much.
Michelle Bachelet there. In a minute, are we about to empty the world's seas of fish? Well, there's a fish fight going on at the moment, and we'll hear about it after this break.